The Maldives, when you hear this name, you instantly imagine a magical place, crystal clear blue waters, white sands, and warm sunshine. It is the perfect destination for rest and relaxation. However, on Thursday, May 14, 2026, this beautiful paradise turned into a true nightmare. 5 Italian divers went underwater and never resurfaced. The tragedy did not stop there. A rescue diver also drowned while attempting to search for them. The culprit? A dark, deep underwater cave that proved to everyone that the sea can never be trusted, even at its most beautiful. What exactly happened in those depths, and how did a routine diving trip turn into a terrifying tragedy? But before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. To understand what happened, we must first look at the nature of the location, because here, the place is not just a backdrop to the story, but its main protagonist. From above, the Maldives look serene and perfect, small islands surrounded by the ocean on all sides. Among these islands lies an area called Vaavu Atoll, and at its heart is a tiny island known as Alimathaa. On the surface, the scene appears entirely normal, crystal clear waters, coral reefs gleaming under the light, and a complete stillness that suggests absolute safety. However, this calm surface hides a thoroughly terrifying world beneath. In the depths, the coral reefs do not remain flat. Instead, they suddenly plunge downward, turning into dark zones, narrow channels, and hidden spaces where sunlight never reaches. At a certain depth, a diver finds themselves in a daunting place. They are no longer in open water from which they can ascend at any moment, but rather beneath a massive rock ceiling that blocks them from going up, making the path they entered through their only way out. This is precisely the immense difference between open water diving and cave diving. In regular diving, if you face any problem, the solution is very simple. All you have to do is ascend. Inside a cave, however, the situation is completely different. The surface is indeed above you, but you cannot reach it directly due to the rock ceiling. The only way to survive and return is the exact same narrow path you entered through, and there is no other. This makes cave diving an entirely different world, a world with its own strict rules and terrifying risks, where the margin for error is absolutely zero. On the morning of May 14, 2026, a group of 5 Italian divers was preparing to descend into the waters of Alimathaa, which we mentioned earlier. These divers were Monica Montefalcone, her daughter Giorgia Somical, Muriel Audinino, Federico Galtieri, and Gianluca Benedetti. The terrifying thing about this story is that these individuals were not novice tourists trying diving for the first time. Rather, some of them were specialists in marine science and research, meaning they understood the sea very well, knew the dangers of caves, and fully realized how strict the rules are down below. The trip began very normally, just like thousands of diving trips start in the Maldives every day. The boat remained waiting above, and the divers entered the water, starting their descent until the coral reefs vanished behind them. On the surface, everything was calm, giving no indication of any danger, but in the depths, the group was heading directly toward a dark cave system located at a depth of 50 meters. At this specific depth, everything changes even before you enter the cave. At 50 meters, a diver consumes air much faster than at the surface. Every breath becomes incredibly precious, time flies by like seconds, and the body is put under immense pressure. Returning to the surface here is not easy, as it requires mandatory decompression stops along the way to relieve pressure on the body. If you add to all of this the presence of a cave, you realize that the dangers were piling up on them layer upon layer. According to reports, this cave consists of 3 chambers connected by narrow passageways, a layout that is highly unusual and incredibly deceptive. The large inner chamber gives the diver a false sense of spaciousness and security, but the narrow passage they entered through is the most critical part of all. On the way in, the passage appears clear and easy, but on the way out, after time has passed, air has depleted, anxiety has mounted, and visibility has vanished. This very same passage can turn into a terrifying and completely unrecognizable place. After their descent, the group delayed significantly and did not resurface. Initially, a delay does not always mean a disaster has occurred. The trip might simply take longer, the divers might spend extra time decompressing, or currents might carry them away from the boat. Often, The first sign of the diver's safety upon resurfacing appears as a small orange buoy floating on the water from afar. Therefore, the crew on the boat waited and watched the water with great anxiety. They were looking for air bubbles, a rising buoy, or any movement confirming that the group was fine and making its way up. However, the water remained completely still. As time passed, the waiting turned into dread, and it was no longer just an ordinary delay. The group never came up, and the last place they were known to be was the entrance of the cave. At this point, rescue teams began preparing to dive, making the operations extremely complex and difficult. If the divers had been lost in open water, it would have been easy to expand the search radius at sea, but if they were inside the cave, it meant the search would be confined to a narrow, deep, and dark space. It also meant sending a rescue diver into the exact same terrifying place where the group had vanished. The first rescue teams descended toward the cave area, moving with extreme caution toward the entrance. There, they encountered the first shock. They found a body underwater. The body belonged to the diver Gianluca Benedetti. He was the first of the 5 to be recovered, but finding him did not end the nightmare. It only made the scene more horrifying. For others were still missing, and since Gianluca had died at the entrance, they knew immediately that the remaining 4 were trapped inside, deep within the dark cave. From that moment on, the mission changed completely. The cave entrance was no longer just a place where a body was found, but became the starting point for a terrifying and complex rescue operation. The first questions were, how do we understand this cave? Where does the path begin? How deep is it? And how far can the rescuers enter safely without running out of air tanks? The operation turned into a series of dangerous, successive attempts. One team would descend to explore as much as possible and then resurface, so the team above could reassess the situation and prepare for another attempt. Every dive progressed a small step forward, but it was a massive gamble with their lives. It was here that a new hero emerged in the story, a man named Mohamed Mahdhee. Mohamed was a military diver in the Maldives National Defense Force. He was not looking for adventure and had no connection to the Italian tourists. Rather, he was called in after the disaster occurred to help reach those trapped inside. Mohamed fully understood the scale of the danger. He was even among those who explained the details of the cave to the president of the Maldives when he visited the accident site. Despite knowing that the cave was dangerous and merciless, Mohamed decided to dive. During one of his difficult dives on the recovery mission, Mohamed suffered from a serious condition known as diver's disease or decompression sickness. This is a hazardous condition that happens during a rapid ascent from the depths, causing nitrogen gas dissolved in the blood and tissues to form gas bubbles. These bubbles block blood vessels, damage tissues, and prevent oxygen from reaching the brain or spinal cord. In severe cases, the result is death, and this is exactly what happened to Mohamed. He was rushed to the hospital in the capital, Malé, but doctors were unable to save him, and he passed away. Following Mohamed's death, the difficult decision was made to suspend recovery operations immediately, not because the missing divers were no longer important, but because the cave was far more dangerous than anticipated. They began looking for a safer plan to enter it. For this reason, a need arose for a different kind of specialist. 3 Finnish professional cave diving experts arrived in the Maldives to help devise a safer recovery plan. The diver's task was not speed or impulsiveness, but completely reorganizing the operation to suit the nature of the cave. At this stage, the situation no longer required mere bravery. Bravery had already been proven, and Mohamed had paid for it with his life. The next step demanded something else: meticulous planning and rigorous scientific calculations to deal with a cave that, up to that point, had claimed 6 lives. On Monday, May 18th, 4 days after the disaster, the search resumed with the participation of the Finnish experts. This time, there was no room for recklessness, as every movement inside the cave was precisely calculated. The amount of available oxygen, the remaining safe time at this depth, and the limits of movement before reaching the point of return, for everyone now knew very well the danger of this place. During this deliberate process, the team finally succeeded in locating the 4 remaining bodies. They found them all in the 3rd and largest chamber of the cave at a depth of approximately 60 meters. Then, they finally extracted all the bodies after 4 days of work and careful planning. However, the answer to the most important question has yet to come. What exactly happened inside that cave, and what turned a diving trip into a journey of no return? Until now, there is no official report confirming the exact moment the disaster began. Therefore, the right way to understand what transpired is to look at the probabilities raised by cave diving experts based on the nature of the location and the available information. The first probability is oxygen depletion. At a depth of 50 meters, a diver consumes air much faster compared to shallow depths. Inside a cave, air is not used just for descending and ascending. It must suffice for the entire return journey, including navigating through narrow passageways. If the group advanced further than planned, stayed inside too long, or if one of them began breathing rapidly due to panic, the safety margin would completely collapse. When air runs low inside a cave, a diver enters a terrifying race against time and distance. They must find the passage, navigate through it, reach open water, and then ascend safely. Running out of air at sea is terrifying, but running out of it inside a dark cave at a depth of 50 meters is an unimaginable nightmare. The second probability is the total loss of visibility. The cave might be very clear and transparent on the way in, but it can turn into absolute darkness on the way out. A single kick of a diver's fin is enough to kick up silt and sediment from the bottom, and a single touch of a hand against the rock wall instantly clouds the water. The movement of 5 divers in a narrow passage is enough to turn the place into a dense white fog. In this situation, dive lights are useless and might even make things worse. The exit could be just a few meters away from you, but proximity is meaningless if you cannot see it. If a diver loses their way at this moment, the cave transforms into a terrifying maze with an unstoppable countdown. The third probability is disorientation and losing the exit. The cave looks easy and clear as you move forward into it. The passages seem intuitive, and the chambers are intriguing. However, on the way back, everything is reversed. A turn that appeared obvious at first can completely vanish when returning from the opposite direction. A single chamber can contain multiple identical-looking dark openings, and a small passage can blend into the rocks to the point of being indistinguishable. If the group entered a wrong opening even for a few seconds, this mistake would push them deeper inside instead of toward the exit. At a depth of 50 meters, every wrong turn costs time and composure. Things that, once lost, can never be recovered. The fourth probability is nitrogen narcosis, rapture of the deep. At great depths, nitrogen gas dissolves into the bloodstream, creating an anesthetic effect on the brain. The mind begins to slow down without the diver feeling any sense of danger. They do not experience fear or a loss of control, but instead think simply and very slowly. Their reflexes are delayed, and they experience a strange, false sense of calm at a time that demands peak alertness and rapid decision-making. This is where the danger lies. A diver might look at their pressure gauge too late, delay the decision to turn back, or view a major problem as a minor issue that can wait. Inside a cave, a few minutes of this sluggishness are enough to end everything. As for the fifth probability, it is the narrowness of the rock passage. The cave contains extremely tight passageways, and when a diver crosses a narrow passage on the way in, they assume that returning will be just as easy. However, the way back is entirely different. By the time it is time to exit, the diver has spent a long period under immense pressure, their air supply is low, their breathing is faster and heavier, and visibility might have dropped to zero. Under these conditions, equipment can get caught on a rocky protrusion, or the body can twist at a wrong angle. If a single diver faces a problem or gets stuck in a narrow passage, the entire team will be obstructed because the exit is shared and there is no alternative route. For all these reasons, what happened cannot be reduced to a single, simple cause, and only investigations may one day reveal the decisive factor. In your opinion, which of the 5 probabilities was the primary cause of this disaster? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. With that, we have reached the end of the video. Thank you for watching.